Video games are like toasters. This is what Ian Bogost, professor of interactive computing at Georgia Institute of Technology, claims in his book, How to Talk About Video Games. Games, in many people's minds, exist as a product, a tool that provides some sort of service, whether that be entertainment, satisfaction, or distraction. At the same time, games are much more involved than toasters. One provides beautifully caramelized carbohydrates, and the other can create worlds and characters with which we identify and fall in love. So where do you land? Are games a product that satisfies a desire, like the craving for buttered, crunchy bread? Or are they something more significant, challenging, and involved? In other words, do games seem more like a product or an experience? Tell the person next to you your answer.
Games are complicated and can often defy categories. We don't read a game like a Tolstoy novel. We don't watch a game like a Nolan film. But we also don't quite perform them like playing spiked ball or dancing. They exist in the gray in-between. They are neither and both. They are something unique and yet familiar.
In our previous episode, we primarily focused on the content found within games. And when people talk about games, that's generally where the discussion goes. However, in this episode, we want to focus on the other half of games, the performance. This is what sets games apart from other forms of media. We don't just idly watch video games, we play them. And much like how learning and playing an instrument affects how our brain processes sound and music, learning and playing a game can affect how our brain processes information, and even how we see the world. In this episode, we're going to examine some of the surprising ways this can play out.
Returning briefly to our first episode, we discussed how games can place a metaphorical game controller into our hands, helping us realize we have more options and choices than we might think. And that's really what games are all about: choice. They teach us our decisions have impact. With the exception of those choose-your-own-adventure books and a handful of shows, games are a media uniquely built on emphasizing the player's choices. Generally, every part of a game is a choice, even on the micro level. Should I jump now or a little later? Should I duck left or right? Should I attack, dodge, or block?
In 1966, psychologist Julian Rotter coined the term the locus of control. He used the phrase to describe a fundamental difference between two kinds of people: people who have an internal locus and people who have an external locus. People with the internal locus believe they have some control over their own lives and tend to be more optimistic. People with the external locus tend to believe that life happens to them and can tend to be more fatalistic. Those with the internal locus tend to have more tenacity and grit and bounce back from failure with a renewed sense of purpose. Those with an external locus might feel more resigned to their fate and believe that whatever happens to them is just their destiny. Carol Dweck describes the internal locus in terms of a mindset that favors growth. She writes, "This growth mindset is based on the belief that your basic qualities are things you can cultivate with your efforts, your strategies, and help from others."
By their emphasis on choice, adaptation, and trying again after failure, games are naturally designed to promote an internal locus and a growth mindset. Really, it's a study in optimism. Some games are even designed to be brutally difficult. Why are they designed this way? Because it makes succeeding all the more exciting. And we learn that we may fail multiple times, but each time we learn a little more and get a little better. It's not so different from our real lives. If we make good choices and pursue health, yes, we may fail sometimes, and yes, life might blindside us, but it's certainly better than neglect or self-sabotage. By continuing to learn, adapt, and iterate, we become better equipped for the hardships and joys to come.
There are limits to this. And if we spend too much time making choices in video games, we can often forget to make choices in our real lives. But leveraged intentionally, games can shift the way we think about the world around us and our place in that world. They can teach us how to shift and adapt to our circumstances. Simply put, video games can help us learn. Now let's begin to break this idea down.
Games are unique in the fact that they require a level of skill to play them in the first place. You don't have to know how to play an instrument to listen to a song, but because games are performative, meaning you have to play them, many people have difficulty even engaging with the medium. When learning a new game, there are different rules, controls, systems, and strategies that all demand the player's attention in order to succeed. For people who have never played games before, all of this can be incredibly daunting.
Last year, the lady I live with, also known as my wife, asked if she could try out one of the games I've been playing. Given the fact that her experience with video games at that point consisted of the occasional race in Mario Kart and a smattering of Crash Bandicoot levels from when she was a kid, I knew with fair confidence that her playing Hollow Knight would go terribly. As she played, every moment, regardless of how seemingly insignificant, had a strange sort of intensity to it. For example, in the tutorial there are a set of platforms that the player needs to jump across. The only penalty for falling is a little bit of time, and on my first playthrough I breezed past it and immediately forgot about it. For her, it was intense beyond belief. She wasn't sure what the penalty for falling would be, and she didn't have a full grasp on how to adjust her jump height and distance. Each successful jump felt like a triumph, and after landing, she'd look out at the next platform, searching for the nerve to jump again.
Yet for people who play games consistently, learning all of these systems and nuances can be incredibly exciting. Why? Because learning is fun. Now, when we begin to learn a game, it can seem like we're only learning that specific game, and that the information we gain is mostly superficial. Yet in a deeper way, we're also learning how to learn. To help unpack this, first discuss these questions. What was something that felt easy to learn? What was something that felt more difficult? Why do you think one was easier and one was more difficult?
Knowledge is always related to another form of knowledge, and learning something could act as a precursor for learning something else. The reason you might find something easy to learn is because you learned something related to it already. The opposite might be true as well. Learning something specific might be more difficult because you've never learned anything like it before. A game can provide that helpful precursor knowledge. You might learn how to work as a team and communicate from doing a raid in Destiny. Sports also do that pretty well. You might learn about architecture or computing from Minecraft. People make literal computers inside of Minecraft. Look, this one plays Pokemon. The Civilization series is famous for its diverse celebration of human history and artistic expression, so you might learn a little bit about history. I only know about Angkor Wat because of Civ.
All of this is something you perform, not just something you passively hear in a lecture. So when you have to jump into learning something related, it comes easier and smoother because you have some experience with it already.
On top of this, the building blocks of learning are essential tools in learning a new game. James Paul Gee describes it in 4 stages. 1, the player must probe the virtual world. 2, based on reflection during and after probing, the player must form a hypothesis about what something might mean in a usefully situated way. 3, the player reprobes the world with that hypothesis in mind, seeing what effect he or she gets. 4, the player treats this effect as feedback from the world and accepts or rethinks his or her original hypothesis.
For people who play games, this should sound oddly familiar. Booting up a game for the first time usually involves this poking and probing. What is allowed and not allowed? What will work and what won't work? Guy describes good games as games that encourage and facilitate active and critical learning and thinking. Good games actively encourage experimentation, and failure is often framed as only a setback on the road to newer and better strategies.
Sometimes, by giving players only the bare essential lessons and then setting them free to succeed, fail, and experiment all on their own, they'll stumble onto experiences that end up meaning that much more because the journey was entirely theirs. And also, we need to understand that when we feel lost or confused in games, sometimes that's actually a blessing.
They actively create a space where it's okay to take risks and real-world consequences are lowered. In games, it rarely feels like failure reflects on us in any significant way.
Now, for people who don't play games much, this process should still sound familiar. Remember science class? It's odd how this process of trial and error, hypothesis and testing can be so invigorating in games, yet sometimes so demoralizing in school. In school, making a mistake is a chunk out of a final grade and can be inaccurately perceived as a marker of how intelligent we are. We put a lot of value on those numerical grades, and sometimes they can actively discourage this tried, tested, and proven method of learning. Failure, getting things wrong, screwing up, is required for learning, and games teach us exactly that by giving us a safe space to fail, learn, and try again.
And there's a beauty in this. None of us are perfect. We're all growing and learning alongside each other. There's grace for our failures and encouragement when we need to pick ourselves back up. Our mistakes don't define us, and even our worst moments don't tell the whole story. The Bible is full of people who continually made mistakes, yet those never defined them. So don't be afraid to jump back in. Hit life hard, and if it hits back, get up and go again. Everyone falls, but not everyone gets back up.
Video games are an incredibly unique form of media, and they're still growing and developing and maturing. Just like other forms of media, they can have incredible benefits, but we also must be aware of their downsides. Games were never meant to replace our real lives, so we have to remain self-aware. Are we using games for rest or for escapism? Do we have communitas or just community? We must continually examine our relationship with games and be willing to listen to the advice of our friends and families. As we do these things, then we'll be able to best leverage this amazing form of media to enhance our real lives and continue to better ourselves and even our world.